Now, some of you say that I talk out of my ass, that I really don't understand what the hell I'm talking about. And I'm going to read you from the Brussels Journal, from a very old article. I believe it was 2006. And this article interviews a man by the name of Vladimir Bukovsky. Now, if you don't know, Bukovsky used to be a dissident in the Soviet Union. He was arrested for political reasons, and he played a very important part in doing activism to expose the fact that a lot of people who were put in mental hospitals in the Soviet Union were done so not because they were mentally ill, but they were done so because they were political dissidents, and it was a really good way of shutting them up without the West knowing that this is happening. So he thinks that the European Union is a monster that must be destroyed, the sooner before it develops into a full-fledged totalitarian state, and this was in 2006. He paid a visit to the European Parliament on Thursday at the invitation of Fidesz, the Hungarian Civic Forum, and Fidesz is a member of the European Christian Democrat group, who had invited the former Soviet dissident from England, where he lives, on the occasion of this year's 50th anniversary of the Hungarian uprising. In his speech, Mr. Bukovsky referred to confidential documents from secret Soviet files, which he was allowed to read in 1992. These documents confirmed the existence of a conspiracy to turn the European Union into a socialist organization. I attended the meeting and taped the speech. A transcript, as well as the audio fragment, approximately 15 minutes, can be found below. I also had a brief interview with Mr. Bukovsky, a transcript and audio fragment, which can also be found below. So let's see what he actually said. So again, he was one of the heroes of the 20th century. He exposed the use of psychiatric imprisonment against political prisoners in the former USSR. And then the Soviets expelled him to the West. He was interviewed by the Russian government to serve as an expert, testifying at the trial conducted to determine whether the Soviet Communist Party had been a criminal institution. And he was given a large access to documents in order to be able to make that decision. So, you are a very famous Soviet dissident, and now you are drawing a parallel between the European Union and the Soviet Union. Can you explain this? Vladimir Bukovsky, I am referring to structures, to certain ideologies being instilled, to the plans, the direction, the inevitable expansion, the obliteration of nations, which was the purpose of the Soviet Union. And this was actually very true. The Soviet Union wanted to rob people of their national identity and instill the Soviet identity. And on the larger scale of things in world politics, the Soviet Union was highly nationalistic. It was highly imperialistic as well. Most people do not understand this. They do not know it because we were raised in the Soviet Union, where we had to study the Soviet ideology. In school and university, the ultimate purpose of the Soviet Union was to create a new historic entity, the Soviet people, which is something that Guy Verhofstadt wants to do, the European people. The same is true for the EU today. They are trying to create a new people. They call these people the Europeans, whatever that means. Here's the difference between the Romanian identity and the European identity. The Romanian identity is something that grew naturally over time. It wasn't instilled. People weren't forced to believe that, no, you're Romanian now. Right? Meanwhile, with the European identity, it's something that is actually pushed. It's something that's actually tried forcing upon people. According to the communist doctrine as well, too many forms of socialist thinking, the state, the nation state, is supposed to wither away. In Russia, however, the opposite happened. Instead of withering away, the Soviet state became a very powerful state, but the nationalities were obliterated. But when the time of the Soviet collapse came, these suppressed feelings of national identity came bouncing back, and they nearly destroyed the country. It was so frightening. Do you think the same can happen if the European Union collapses? Absolutely. You can press a spring only that much, and the human psyche is very resilient, You can press it, but don't forget it's still accumulating a power to rebound. It is like a spring, it always goes to overshoot. This is something that I constantly say, the more you go to the left, the more chances are there's going to be a countercurrent that pushes to the right. And the more you go to the right, there's going to be a countercurrent that pushes to the left. Problems do not disappear, they just go away for a little while. But all these countries that joined the European Union did so voluntarily. Now, I kind of disagree with this in a way because The European Union, when they want countries to join, they make it very economically difficult for them to survive outside of the EU, so you kind of have to join. In my country, for example, most people didn't vote on the referendum to change the constitution in order to be able to get into the European Union. So what the government did is that they extended the referendum period until it managed to get the quorum. What I'm trying to say is that the European Union is highly probably bribing, the leaders of Eastern European countries just in order to get them to do whatever it's possible in order to join. That's just one of my personal theories. But anyway, he says that they did not. Denmark, which voted against the Maastricht Treaty twice, Ireland, which voted against the Nice Treaty, many countries, they were under enormous pressure. It is almost blackmail. Switzerland was forced to vote 5 times in a referendum. All 5 times they rejected it. But who knows what will happen the 6th time, the 7th. This is something that the European Union does a lot, and it's not democracy. They will ask you to vote for something, and if you vote no, they will ask you to vote for it again and again and again until you vote yes. And once you vote yes, then they never ask again. Like you will never get a chance to resend that legislation. Actually, this is one of the biggest criticisms I have against the European Union Parliament, that the MPs can never be able to revoke legislation. Right? They can only vote yes or no on laws. They can never look at the law and say, right, I don't like this law, I want it repealed. It is a trick for idiots. The people have to vote in referendums until people vote in the way that is wanted. We see this with Brexit. Then they have to stop voting. Why stop? Let us continue voting. The European Union is what Americans would call a shotgun marriage. It's another thing. A lot of Brexiteers now want another vote, and I think the reason the people don't want to give the vote to the Remainers is because they're afraid that if the vote doesn't go for Brexit again, there will never be a third vote. And I think the Remainers know this. Like if they manage to get Britain to remain, they will never allow another Brexit vote. What do you think young people should do about the European Union? What should they insist on? To democratize the institution or just abolish it? I think the European Union, like the Soviet Union, cannot be democratized. Gorbachev tried to democratize it and it blew up. This kind of structures cannot be democratized. But we have the European Parliament, which is chosen by the people. The European Parliament is elected on the basis of proportional representation, which is not true representation. And what does it vote on? The percentage of fat in yogurt, that kind of thing, it is ridiculous. It is given the task of the Supreme Soviet. The average MP can speak for 6 minutes per year in the chamber. That is not a real parliament. In 1992, I had unprecedented access to Politburo and the Central Committee secret documents, which have been classified and still are even now. For 30 years, these documents show very clearly that the whole idea of turning the European common market into a federal state was agreed between the left-wing parties of Europe and Moscow as a joint project, which Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev called our common European home. The idea was very simple. It first came up in 1985 to 86 when the Italian communists visited Gorbachev. Followed by the German Social Democrats, they all complained that the changes in the world, particularly after British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher introduced privatization and economic liberalization, were threatening to wipe out the achievement, as they call it, of generations of socialists and social democrats, threatening to reverse it completely. Therefore, the only way to withstand this onslaught of wild capitalism, as they call it, was to try to introduce the same socialist goals in all countries at once. Prior to that, the left-wing parties and the Soviet Union had oppressed European integration very much because they perceived it as a means to block their socialist goals. However, from 1985 onwards, they completely changed their view. The Soviets came to a conclusion and to an agreement with the left-wing parties that if they worked together, they could hijack the whole European project and turn it upside down. Instead of an open market, they would turn it into a federal state. According to the secret Soviet documents, 1985-86 is the turning point. I have published most of these documents. You might even find them on the internet, but the conversations they had are really eye-opening. For the first time, you understand that there is a conspiracy, quite understandable for them, as they were trying to save their political hides. In the East, the Soviets needed a change of relations with Europe because they were entering a protracted and very deep structural crisis. In the West, the left-wing parties were afraid of being wiped out and losing their influence and prestige. So it was a conspiracy quite openly made by them, agreed upon and worked out. In January 1989, a delegation of the Trilateral Commission came to see Gorbachev. It included former Japanese Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone, former French President Valéry Giscard, I just can't, American banker David Rockefeller, and former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. They had a very nice conversation where they tried to explain to Gorbachev that Soviet Russia had to integrate into the financial institutions of the world, such as the IMF, GATT, and the World Bank. In the middle of it, the French president suddenly takes the floor and says, "Mr. President, I cannot tell you exactly when it will happen, probably within 15 years. But Europe is going to be a federal state, and you have to prepare yourself for that. You have to work out with us and the European leaders how you would react to that, how would you allow the other Eastern European countries to interact with it, or how to become a part of it. You have to be prepared." So I'm not going to just read all of this because you can do it yourself, but there's going to be a link to the description and you can find out more. I found this to be very interesting because it's the way I reached to the conclusions that the European Union is bad was not because of these articles. I have reached these conclusions by reading what comes out of the European Union for several years now. And after reaching the conclusion, this article that's from 2006 only serves to prove that I was right all along and that all of my fears are being realized. Let me know what you think in the comment section. I strongly suggest you give this a really good read because it's very interesting. I'll probably read all of it in my live stream. Don't forget that I do have another live stream channel. Please check it out and let me know what you think, whether their grievances will be heard or not. Anyway, the elections are coming. I'll vote according to how the MPs vote on Article 11 and 13. You guys should also, if you're from Europe, get informed and know how to vote properly. There's a lot of people that say, well, voting doesn't do anything. Voting doesn't change anything. That may be true, but still, it's better than having another person take your vote. Right, let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys on my live stream channel. Don't forget I have one. Please subscribe to it, and hopefully YouTube will give you updates that I'm there and recording. So with that said, I'll see you all.